Someone was short with you today. You have replayed it 4 times since, and you are about to find out why your brain does this to everyone except them. It happened at 2:47 in the afternoon. Someone you work with answered a question. You asked with a flatness that had nothing to do with you. They were tired or distracted or carrying something from earlier in their day that had not resolved before you walked into the room, and by 2:48 you'd already started building the case. What did I do? Was it the email I sent this morning? Did I say something wrong in the meeting? Are they upset with me about the thing from last week that I thought we had moved past? By the time you left work, you had constructed an entire narrative, detailed, plausible, emotionally convincing, about a failure that, in all likelihood, had nothing to do with you at all. This is not a rare event in your life. This is the architecture of your days. Something happens at the edge of your awareness, a tone, a delay in response, a look you cannot fully interpret, and your mind does not register it as information about the other person's interior state. It registers it as evidence about you, about what you did wrong, what you are responsible for repairing, what it means about your worth that this happened in the first place. You have been doing this for so long that it does not feel like a pattern. It feels like perception. It feels like simply being a person who notices things and cares about the people around them, but there is a name for what is actually happening. And Carl Jung mapped the precise psychological mechanism behind it almost a century before the phrase internalizing everything became common enough to search for. What he found explains not just why you do this, but why trying to simply stop doing it through willpower has never worked, and what actually changes the pattern when the right intervention finally arrives. The mechanism Jung identified is called introjection, and it is the precise opposite of the more commonly discussed concept of projection. Projection is when you place your own unexamined material onto someone else, seeing your suppressed anger in their behavior, your hidden envy in their success. Introjection runs the other direction. It is the unconscious process of absorbing what belongs to someone else and treating it as though it originated in you. When the person was short with you at 2:47, what they were actually carrying, their fatigue, their unresolved mourning, their entirely separate emotional weather, did not stay located in them. Some part of your psyche reached out, took it in, and metabolized it as personal evidence. Their bad mood became your failure. Their distraction became your inadequacy. This is not a flaw in your perception. It is a specific developmental adaptation that Jung traced back to a precise psychological logic that almost every person who internalizes everything shares, whether or not they can identify it. Here is the logic, stated plainly. A child has no power over their environment. None. They cannot leave, cannot change the adults around them, cannot alter the emotional weather of the household they depend on for survival, and a powerless child facing an unpredictable environment has exactly 2 psychological options, neither of them conscious or chosen. The first option is to accept that the environment is genuinely unpredictable and that bad things can happen for reasons entirely outside their control. This option is, for a child's developing nervous system, almost unbearable. It means the danger could return at any moment, for any reason, with no way to prevent it. The second option is to believe that the unpredictability is actually predictable, that it is connected to something the child did or did not do, and because if the cause is internal, then the child has a theoretical path to control. If I am quieter, if I am better, if I am more careful, if I notice the warning signs earlier and adjust myself accordingly, then I can prevent the bad thing from happening again. This second option is psychologically devastating in its long-term cost, and it is also, for a child's nervous system, infinitely more bearable than the alternative. Jung observed that children consistently choose the second option, not because they are wrong about the world, because the illusion of control, purchased at the price of chronic self-blame, feels safer than the truth of genuine powerlessness. Stay with this for a moment, because what comes next is the part most people never connect to their adult life. The child who learned to absorb the emotional atmosphere of their environment and convert it into personal responsibility did not stop doing this when they grew up. The nervous system that adapted to a specific childhood environment does not receive an update notice when the environment changes. It continues running the same protective logic into adulthood, in contexts where the logic no longer serves any protective function at all. You are not in danger when a colleague answers you flatly. There is no survival reason for your nervous system to scan that interaction for evidence of your own failure, but the pathway that converts external emotional weather into internal personal evidence was built so early and reinforced so consistently that it now fires automatically in workplaces, practices. In friendships, in romantic relationships, in any interaction where another person's internal state is even slightly ambiguous. Jung called the specific psychic structure this builds a complex and emotionally charged cluster of memory, belief, and automatic response that operates with a degree of autonomy from the rest of the conscious personality. The complex does not consult you before activating. It does not check whether the current situation actually resembles the original conditions that built it. It simply fires with the full emotional force of the original protective logic every time a sufficiently similar trigger appears. This is why understanding the pattern intellectually has never been enough to stop it. You already know somewhere that you are probably not responsible for your colleague's mood. You know this, and the knowing changes nothing about the 4 replays that happened anyway. The complex does not operate at the level where knowing lives. It operates underneath it, in the older and faster system that built itself before language was even fully available to you. Here is the turn that changes how you relate to this pattern, and it is the turn that most people who internalize everything have never been offered. The habit of internalizing was never a weakness. It was a specific, intelligent, resourceful adaptation built by a younger version of you who had genuinely limited options and who chose, correctly given those options, the path that offered the most psychological safety available. The child who decided that the household's tension was somehow their fault was not being irrational. They were doing the only thing a powerless person facing genuine unpredictability can do, to create a sense of agency. That decision protected something real. It allowed a young nervous system to feel that the world had rules, even punishing ones rather than no rules at all. This reframe matters because most attempts to stop internalizing begin from a position of self-criticism. You tell yourself to stop being so sensitive, to stop taking everything personally, to toughen up. And this approach fails for a precise reason. You cannot dismantle a protective structure by attacking the part of you that built it for good reasons. The complex does not respond to criticism. It responds to safety, and the actual work of loosening its grip begins not with willpower, but with a specific kind of evidence. Repeated, embodied, accumulated evidence that the current environment does not require the same protective logic that the original one did. The first practice that begins to change this is what Jung would have called making the unconscious conscious, applied in the smallest possible unit. The next time you notice yourself constructing a narrative about your own failure in response to someone else's ambiguous behavior, you do not need to stop the narrative immediately. You need to do something smaller and more precise. Name the mechanism out loud, even quietly, even just in your own mind. Say specifically, this is the complex. This is the old pattern, not new information. You are not asking yourself to believe that you did nothing wrong as sometimes you might have. You are interrupting the automatic conversion of ambiguity into certainty. The complex thrives on speed. It builds its case quickly, before slower and more accurate processing has a chance to weigh in. The single act of naming it, this is the old pattern, introduces a half-second of friction into a process that depends on having none. That half-second, repeated across hundreds of instances over weeks, is where the actual rewiring begins, not through insight alone, through the accumulated practice of interrupting the automatic sequence at its earliest possible point. The second practice requires more courage and produces a more durable result. It is the deliberate act of checking your internalized narrative against actual evidence out loud with the person involved, in situations where the relationship can tolerate it. This does not mean confronting every person who gives you a flat response. It means choosing, specifically and selectively, the relationships that matter most. And in those relationships, practicing a sentence you have probably never said before. Something like, I noticed you seemed distant earlier and I want to check whether that's something I should be aware of, or whether it's about something else entirely. This sentence does something the internalizing complex cannot do on its own. It introduces external data into a system that has been running entirely on internal speculation. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the answer reveals that the cause had nothing to do with you. And when this happens enough times, in real situations with real people, the complex begins to receive what it has never received before. Direct evidence that the world does not, in fact, consistently confirm its core assumption. This is slower and more uncomfortable than simply deciding to think differently. It is also the only intervention that produces change at the level where the pattern actually lives. The third practice addresses what happens after the internalizing has already occurred, when you catch yourself 3 hours into a spiral that the first 2 practices did not prevent. In this moment, the work is not to stop the feeling. It is to physically separate, in language, what belongs to you from what does not. Jung's method for this, refined across decades of clinical work, was deceptively simple. Take the specific narrative you have built, they're upset with me because of what I did, and rewrite it as 2 separate sentences inferences rather than one causal claim. The first sentence states only what you actually observed. They responded to me with less warmth than usual. The second sentence states only what you do not yet know. I do not currently know why. This separation feels almost too small to matter, and it is in fact one of the most effective interventions available because the internalizing complex operates specifically by fusing observation and interpretation into a single, undifferentiated certainty, splitting them back apart. Observation here, unknown cause there, removes the fuel that the spiral runs on. You can sit with an unknown cause far more easily than you can sit with a certain failure. The complex has been denying you access to the unknown option for years. This practice hands it back. What changes when these three practices are sustained over months rather than days is not that you stop noticing other people's emotional states. That capacity, the sensitivity that built the internalizing pattern in the first place, is not a flaw to be removed. It is, when no longer hijacked by automatic self-blame, one of the most valuable forms of perception a person can have. What changes is the conversion process. The noticing remains. The automatic translation of that noticing into evidence against yourself slows down, then weakens, then in many cases stops being automatic at all. You begin to experience other people's bad days as information about their days, rather than verdicts about your worth. This does not happen because you became less caring or less attuned. It happens because the protective structure that was built by a powerless child finally received what it had been waiting for the entire time. It operated in the dark, direct, repeated, embodied proof that you are not currently in the environment that built it, and that you no longer need to purchase a sense of control at the price of constant self-accusation. The child who built this pattern is not gone. They are simply, finally, no longer required to keep doing the only job they ever knew how to do.